They handed her a garbage bag for her belongings. After 12 years of marriage, $47 was all she had left. Her husband's mistress was already redecorating her bedroom. Her mother-in-law laughed as she signed the divorce papers in silence. They expected her to disappear into poverty and shame. 3 weeks later, a private jet landed at the most exclusive gala in New York. The door opened, and the woman who stepped out was not the broken ex-wife they remembered. She had come to destroy everything they built. But here's what nobody knew. Her revenge almost failed. 3 times she lost everything she had rebuilt. 3 times she was betrayed by people she trusted. 3 times she nearly gave up and sent a surrender email to the woman who destroyed her life. What she discovered about her own marriage will shock you. The conspiracy went deeper than cheating. It went deeper than money. For 6 years, they had been planning her destruction, and she had no idea. This is the story of how one woman went from a garbage bag to a billionaire's jet. From victim to victor. From silence to the courtroom testimony that sent her ex-mother-in-law to prison for 12 years. But the ending? The ending is not what you expect. Value statement and lesson: this story carries a powerful message for every woman who has ever felt trapped, dismissed, or underestimated. The lesson is simple but life-changing. Your past does not define you. Your age does not limit you. And the people who try to break you have no idea what you are capable of becoming. Whether you are 25 or 55, whether you are starting over or starting fresh, remember this. Second chapters are always possible. The cage door is not locked. You just forgot you have the key. 3 years ago, I signed my divorce papers in complete silence. My husband's mistress was already redecorating my bedroom. His mother handed me a garbage bag for my belongings. They gave me exactly 47 minutes to leave the estate I had called home for 12 years. They thought I would disappear into poverty and shame. They were wrong. But what happened next? Nobody, not even me, could have predicted. The scratch of pen against paper was the only sound in the mahogany-paneled library of the Hayes estate. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, a rhythmic drumming that seemed to mock the devastation happening inside. I sat straight-backed in the leather chair, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me slouch. 12 years of marriage reduced to 47 pages of legal documents. 12 years of cooking his favorite meals, hosting his boring business dinners, smiling through his mother's constant criticisms. All of it erased with a signature. My name is Elena Dawson. At least, that is my name now. For 12 years, I was Elena Hayes, wife of Richard Hayes III, daughter-in-law of the formidable Margaret Hayes, and according to Connecticut Society, one of the luckiest women in New England. Lucky. That word still makes me laugh. Richard checked his Rolex for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. He was bored of me, bored of this process, eager to get back to whatever 28-year-old distraction was waiting for him upstairs. Signed page 34, Elena. His mother's voice cut through my thoughts like a knife through silk. She stood behind Richard, her vintage Chanel pearls gleaming against her black dress. Margaret Hayes was a woman who weaponized etiquette and wielded cruelty like a designer handbag, proudly and conspicuously. The one confirming you will not contest the prenuptial agreement, and do try to keep your tears off the paper. It is imported parchment. I looked up at her. My eyes were dry. I had cried all my tears 3 nights ago when I found Richard in our bed with Jessica Thornton, the 28-year-old daughter of a real estate developer. Richard had not even apologized. He had simply sighed, run a hand through his graying hair, and told me it was time to be realistic about our compatibility. Compatibility, as if I were an appliance that no longer matched his kitchen decor. "I do not want to contest anything," I said softly. My voice was steady, surprising even myself. "I just want to leave." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. She had expected tears, she had expected begging. She had prepared for a fight that I was not going to give her. The prenup I had signed at 30, young and desperately in love, was about to destroy me. Richard had told me it was unnecessary to hire my own lawyer. "We are soulmates," he had said. "This is just a formality for my family's accountants." I believed him, God help me. I believed every word. Now I was learning the truth. I would receive $50,000 total, less than 1 month of Richard's golf club membership fees. I had to vacate the premises within 48 hours. I could not use the Hayes name in any professional capacity. I forfeited all claims to the $400 million estate I had helped maintain for over a decade. Margaret slid a black garbage bag across the polished table toward me. Her smile was reptilian. "For your personal effects," she said sweetly. "I had the staff pack your costume jewelry already. The real pieces, of course, stay with the family." I stared at the garbage bag. This woman had given me garbage bags for my belongings. After 12 years of marriage to her son, she was sending me out like yesterday's trash. A movement in the doorway caught my attention. Jessica Thornton stood there, wearing my favorite silk robe. The one Richard had bought me for our 5th anniversary. The one I had worn on lazy Sunday mornings while he read the paper and I made pancakes from scratch. "Richie," Jessica called out, her voice high and careless. "The decorator is online too. She wants to know if we should keep the wife's garden or put in a tennis court." Richard did not even look at me. Tennis court. She never had a green thumb anyway. My garden. 12 years of cultivation. The roses by the south wall that had finally started blooming after 3 years of patient care. My therapy. My sanctuary. Dismissed in one sentence. "The roses take 3 years to bloom properly," I said quietly, signing another page. "The ones by the south wall are finally starting to produce. If you wait until June, they will be beautiful." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "We are not interested in gardening tips from the help, dear." The help. After 12 years, that was what I had become. The help. I signed the last page. My hand did not shake. I had already decided that these people would never see me tremble. "Done," I whispered, sliding the folder across the heavy desk. Margaret snatched it immediately, flipping through pages as if expecting me to have written a curse in invisible ink. When she saw all the signatures in order, that reptilian smile returned. Finally, she breathed, "God, Preston, I told you 5 years ago this day would come. Mixed status marriages never work." She was a waitress when you met her, for heaven's sake. You cannot turn a stray cat into a show dog. I stood up. I was wearing a simple beige trench coat over black slacks. Nothing designer. Nothing that belonged to them. I had learned that much in the past 3 days. Everything designer in my closet had been purchased with Hayes money, which meant everything designer in my closet was no longer mine. "I will call a cab," I said. "It is waiting at the gate." Margaret laughed, a harsh barking sound. A cab. How fitting. "Make sure you do not take any of the silverware on your way out." I paused at the door. For just one moment, I let myself look at her, really look at her. I saw a 71-year-old woman who had spent her entire life measuring her worth by her husband's money and her son's social standing. I saw someone who would die alone in this enormous house, surrounded by expensive things, and not a single person who genuinely loved her. For just a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Goodbye, Margaret," I said. I hope the price of your son's happiness was worth it. Then I walked out, my heels clicking on the marble floor of the foyer. My bags were already by the door, two modest suitcases containing everything I owned that was truly mine. I did not look back at the grand staircase. I did not look back at the crystal chandelier that I had helped select for the renovation 3 years ago. I did not look back at the life I had tried so desperately to build. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, I stepped into the rain. The cab was idling by the wrought iron gates. I got in, soaked to the bone, mascara probably running down my face. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked, eyeing me through the rear-view mirror. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Not the iPhone Richard had paid for. I had left that on the kitchen counter. This was a cheap, prepaid phone I had bought yesterday with the last $47.63 in my personal checking account. I stared at the screen, rain streaming down the windows. Where to? I did not know. My parents were dead. My friends, I realized with horror, were all Richard's friends. His social secretary had managed my calendar so completely that I had not made an independent connection in years. I was 42 years old, and I had no one. "The bus station," I finally said. "Greyhound." The driver nodded and pulled away from the gate. As the Hayes estate disappeared behind me, I made myself a promise. I did not know how. I did not know when, but someday, somehow, I would make them regret ever handing me that garbage bag. The Greyhound station in Hartford smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. I sat on a plastic bench, my designer dress wrinkled and damp, my mascara dried in streaks down my cheeks. Around me, the midnight crowd shuffled past. A mother with two sleeping children, a teenager with a guitar case, an elderly man reading a newspaper from 3 days ago. Normal people, living normal lives. People who had never had to worry about which fork to use at a charity gala or whether their diamond earrings were appropriate for a Tuesday luncheon. I had spent 12 years learning to be extraordinary. Now I needed to remember how to be ordinary. My phone rang, the cheap prepaid one. I had given the number to exactly one person. "Elena?" Carol Sullivan's voice was warm but worried. "I heard what happened. Margaret is already telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown. Where are you?" Carol Sullivan was the wife of one of Richard's business associates. We had spoken maybe 10 times at various events, but she was the only person who had ever talked back to Margaret at a dinner party, and for that alone, I had always liked her. "Bus station," I admitted. "I do not actually know where I am going." There was a pause on the line. Then Carol said something that changed my life. "I have a spare room above my bookshop in Vermont. It is not much. Leaky roof. Temperamental radiator. But it is warm, and it is safe, and Margaret Hayes does not know it exists." "Why?" I asked. "Why would you help me? We barely know each other." Carol laughed. "Because Margaret told me not to. That woman's disapproval is my compass. If she hates something, I know it is worth loving. Get on the bus to Burlington. I will pick you up." 3 hours later, I was standing outside a small bookshop called Second Chapter Books. The irony of the name was not lost on me. Carol Sullivan was waiting with an umbrella and a cup of hot chocolate. She was 45, with graying brown hair and laugh lines that suggested a life spent smiling. She looked at my ruined designer dress and my two pathetic suitcases and did not say a word about any of it. "The room is up the stairs," she said. "There is soup on the stove. We can talk tomorrow, or we can never talk about it at all. Your choice." I burst into tears. Right there on the sidewalk, in front of a stranger who was showing me more kindness than my own husband had in years. Carol just handed me a tissue and led me inside. The room above the bookshop was tiny. The ceiling did leak. The radiator did clank ominously at random intervals, but there was a soft bed with clean sheets and a window that looked out over the main street of a small Vermont town where nobody knew my name. That first night, I slept for 14 hours straight. It was the best sleep I had gotten in 12 years. The next morning, I took stock of my situation. Assets: $50,000 from the divorce settlement, which had not yet been deposited, 2 suitcases of clothes, a cheap phone, and apparently one friend I had not known I had. Liabilities: no job, no references, no recent work experience, no home, no family, and a 15-year gap on my resume that screamed kept woman. I was 42 years old, starting over from scratch. Over coffee that morning, Carol asked me the question that would define my next chapter. What did you do before you became Mrs. Hayes? I paused, the mug halfway to my lips. It had been so long since anyone had asked me about my life before Richard, so long since I had thought about it myself. I was a marketing director, I said slowly, at a firm in Boston. I was actually pretty good at it. I helped launch 3 products that became market leaders. I was on track for a vice president position. And then I met Richard at a charity event. He was charming and handsome and interested in me. Me, a girl from a middle-class family in Oregon who was working 70-hour weeks and eating ramen for dinner. He made me feel special. He made me feel chosen. Carol nodded, understanding in her eyes our eyes. So you gave it all up. He said he wanted a partner, not a competitor. He said the Hayes family had traditional values. He said I could always go back to work later, after we had children, but there were no children. Number 1, I looked down at my coffee. 3 rounds of IVF. 3 failures. Richard blamed my stress levels, my age, my inability to relax. His mother blamed my inferior genetics. Nobody ever suggested that maybe the problem was his. Carol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. 15 years is not a lifetime, Elena. It is a detour. The question is, what do you do now? I spent the next week applying for jobs. I updated my resume, trying to spin 12 years of planning, charity galas, and managing household staff into something that sounded like real experience. I wrote cover letters until my fingers ached. The responses were devastating. First interview at a marketing agency in Burlington. Your experience is impressive, the hiring manager said, not meeting my eyes, but we are looking for someone more digitally native. Do you know what TikTok is? Second interview at a corporate office in Boston. The commute had cost me $40 I could not afford. The gap in your resume is concerning, the HR director said, frowning at my application. What exactly were you doing for 15 years? I was married to the CEO of Hayes Industries, I started to explain. Ah. Her expression shifted to something between pity and contempt. A kept woman, I see. Well, we are really looking for go-getters here, self-starters, people with fire in their belly. I have fire, I said, hating the desperation in my voice. I have plenty of fire. She smiled politely and said she would call me. She never did. Third interview for an entry-level position at a retail store, $14 an hour. You are overqualified, the manager said, barely glancing at my resume. You will leave the moment something better comes along. Nothing better is coming along, I said. That is why I am here. She looked at me with something like pity. We will let you know. They did not let me know. They never let me know. After 2 months, my settlement money arrived. I deposited the $50,000 with shaking hands, watching my bank balance climb to the highest it would probably ever be again. I did the math obsessively. If I was extremely careful, if I never ate out, if I kept living in Carol's spare room for minimal rent, I could stretch this money for maybe 18 months. 2 years if I was lucky. 2 years to rebuild a life from nothing. 127 job applications later, I got my 8th interview and my 8th rejection. You are not a culture fit, they said. Not a culture fit for a job at the mall, selling handbags. That night, I locked myself in Carol's bathroom and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, dark circles under her eyes, gray at her temples that she used to hide with expensive salon visits, lines around her mouth from years of fake smiling. Who are you? I asked the reflection. Who are you without his name, his money, his world? The reflection did not answer. I do not know how long I stood there, long enough for Carol to knock on the door. Elena? There is someone downstairs asking for you. I splashed water on my face and went down, expecting maybe a delivery driver or a lost tourist. Instead, I found an elegant woman in her late 60s standing among the bookshelves. She wore a simple gray suit that probably cost more than everything in my suitcases combined. But she wore it with the casual confidence of someone who had stopped caring about impressing people decades ago. Elena Dawson, she said. It was not a question. You do not know me, but I knew your mother. We were roommates at Smith College, class of '79. My name is Vivian Hartwell, and I have been trying to find you for 3 weeks. I stared at Vivian Hartwell, certain I had misheard. My mother never mentioned a college roommate, I said carefully. Vivian smiled, and there was sadness in it. Your mother and I lost touch when she married your father. He did not approve of me. Too unconventional, he said. I was starting a business instead of finding a husband. Very scandalous in 1980. She moved to one of Carol's worn armchairs and sat down as if she had been there 100 times before. There was something about her, a quiet authority that made you want to listen. I saw the divorce announcement in the society pages, Vivian continued. Margaret Hayes made sure everyone knew you were, and I quote, released due to irreconcilable differences, as if you were a faulty appliance being returned to the manufacturer. That sounds like Margaret. I remembered your mother telling me once, years ago, that her daughter was the smartest person she knew, that you were wasted on the Hayes boy. Her words, not mine. My chest tightened. My mother had died 7 years ago, and we had never been close. She had disapproved of my marriage, but I had assumed it was jealousy or pettiness. She had never told me she thought I deserved better. What do you want? I asked, because kindness from strangers made me suspicious now. Vivian reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Hartwell Communications, established 1982. An address in Boston. I founded a public relations firm 40 years ago, she said. We are not the biggest. We are not the flashiest, but we are good at what we do, and we have survived 3 recessions, 2 market crashes, and the entire collapse of print media. Do you know why? I shook my head. Because I hire people who have something to prove. People who have been knocked down and gotten back up. People like me. She fixed me with a steady gaze. People like you. You do not know anything about me. I know you were the youngest marketing director in your company's history before you threw it all away for Richard Hayes. I know you managed a household staff of 12, coordinated over 100 social events, and somehow survived Margaret Hayes for 12 years without committing murder. That takes more skill than half my senior executives possess. I opened my mouth to argue, but she held up a hand. I am not offering you charity, Elena. I am offering you a job, entry level. Terrible pay, long hours. You will start as an assistant and work your way up like everyone else. You will make coffee, schedule meetings, and probably cry in the bathroom at least twice a week. She paused. Interested? Why? The word came out more desperate than I intended. Why would you take a chance on me? I have not worked in 15 years, because your mother was my best friend, and I owe her. She asked me once, if anything happened to her, would I look out for you? I said yes. I am 20 years late, but I am here. Vivian stood up, smoothing her suit jacket. Monday, 9 a.m. Do not be late. She was halfway to the door before I found my voice. Ms. Hartwell? She turned. Thank you, Vivian smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Do not thank me yet. You have not seen how much work I am going to make you do. She paused at the door. And Elena, cut your hair. You look like you are still waiting for Richard Hayes to approve of you. The door chimed as she left. Carol appeared from behind a bookshelf where she had clearly been eavesdropping. Well, she said, that was unexpected. I looked down at Vivian's business card. My hands were shaking, but this time it was not from fear. Carol? I said slowly. Yes? Do you know anyone who cuts hair? 3 days later, I stood outside Hartwell Communications in downtown Boston. My hair was cut into a sharp bob that made me look 5 years younger and a decade more confident. I was wearing a blazer I had found at a thrift store for $12 and pants that Carol had hemmed for me because I could not afford alterations. I was terrified. But I walked through those doors anyway. The first 6 months were brutal. I learned new software, new platforms, new everything. The marketing world had transformed while I was arranging flower centerpieces and selecting wine pairings. Social media, influencer partnerships, data analytics, SEO, words that might as well have been ancient Greek. I made mistakes, a lot of them. I sent an email to the wrong client. I accidentally scheduled 3 meetings at the same time. I once spent an entire afternoon working on a presentation only to discover I had saved over the original file with a blank document. I cried in the bathroom, just like Vivian predicted, but I also learned. Every night, I stayed late, reading industry publications and watching tutorial videos. Every morning, I arrived early, organizing my desk and reviewing my notes. I asked questions constantly, probably annoying my coworkers, but I did not care about being liked. I cared about being competent. At the end of 6 months, I landed my first client solo, a small bakery wanting help with social media. The owner, a woman named Patty Morrison, had been turned away by 3 other firms for being too small. I will take you, I told her. I know what it is like to be dismissed because you do not look like enough. Patty looked at me with surprise, then smiled. You actually listened to what I wanted. The last 3 people just talked at me. That was my superpower, I realized. All those years of listening to Margaret's criticisms, reading Richard's moods, navigating high society politics, I had learned to hear what people actually needed, even when they did not say it directly. By the end of my first year, I was promoted to junior account manager. My clients loved me. Vivian was quietly proud, though she expressed it mostly through assigning me more difficult work. I made a friend. Marcus Williams was 35, whip-smart, with a sardonic wit that could cut glass. He had 0 filter and 0 tolerance for pretension. To Elena, Marcus said at my 1-year anniversary dinner, raising his glass, who went from Mrs. Hayes to Miss Dawson, your 9 a.m. is here in 12 months. We love a redemption arc. Carol had come down from Vermont for the occasion. Vivian sat at the head of the table, looking pleased. I am hardly redeemed, I laughed. I am just surviving. Surviving is the first step, Vivian said. You would be surprised how many people never get past it. That night, walking back to my tiny apartment, I felt something I had not felt in years. Hope. I should have known it could not last. It was a Monday morning, when everything fell apart. I remember because Mondays were my favorite. Fresh start. New possibilities. I had a presentation scheduled for 10 and a client lunch at noon. I arrived at Hartwell Communications to find police cars outside and employees crying on the sidewalk. What happened? I grabbed Marcus's arm. What is going on? His face was pale. Vivian. She had a stroke over the weekend. She is alive, but he shook his head. It is bad, Elena. Really bad. Vivian Hartwell, the woman who had given me a second chance, was in the hospital. She could not speak. She could not move her right side. She could not run the company she had built over 40 years. And waiting in the wings was her nephew, Bradley Hartwell. Bradley had never worked a day at the company. He lived in New York, doing something vague with investments and spending his trust fund on bottle service. But he was family, and he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Within 48 hours, he had assumed temporary control. Within 72 hours, he announced restructuring. Within 1 week, he fired me. "We are streamlining," Bradley said, not even looking at me as he delivered the news. "Senior staff only." "You are what? An assistant who got lucky?" "I was a junior account manager with 7 clients who specifically requested me," I said, keeping my voice steady even as my world collapsed again. Bradley shrugged. "Do not worry. I will have someone write you a reference." Someone. Not even him. He could not be bothered to write a recommendation for the person he was destroying. I packed my desk in a cardboard box. Marcus helped, his jaw tight with anger. "This is not right," he muttered. "Vivian would never let this happen." "Vivian cannot stop it," I said, "and neither can we." That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the debris of my second destroyed life in 3 years. I was 43 years old. I had $12,000 in savings. My mentor was incapacitated. My job was gone. And once again, a man who had not earned anything had taken everything from me. Richard inherited his money, Bradley inherited his aunt's company, and I inherited nothing but my own 2 hands. I looked at those hands. So use them, I told myself. And this time, I was going to build something nobody could take away. The Boston Public Library became my office. I could not afford a workspace, but I could afford the bus fare to a building with free Wi-Fi and endless books. I sat there for hours with a legal pad, doing math that did not work. I could not compete with Bradley's connections. I could not outspend him. I had no leverage, no power, no resources. But I had something else. I had relationships. For a year, I had built connections with clients who trusted me. I had learned their businesses, their families, their dreams. I knew that Patty Morrison's bakery was named after her late grandmother. I knew that the restaurant chain owner was terrified of public speaking and needed extra support before every interview. These were not just accounts to me, they were people. And Bradley Hartwell was about to lose every single one of them. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. "Hi, this is Elena Dawson. I used to manage your account at Hartwell Communications. I heard about the restructuring, and I wanted to check in. How are things going with the new team?" The answers were unanimous. Terrible. Nobody returns my calls anymore. They assign me to some kid who does not know the difference between Instagram and LinkedIn. I have been trying to reach someone for 2 weeks about the spring campaign. Nothing. Bradley had replaced skilled account managers with his college friends, people who had never worked in PR, who did not understand the business, who treated clients like inconveniences rather than partners. Here is what I learned in those 12 years as a society wife. People remember how you made them feel. It is not about the fancy dinners or the expensive gifts. It is about whether you listened when they talked, whether you remembered their daughter's birthday, whether you made them feel seen. I had spent a year making my clients feel valued. Bradley had spent 2 weeks making them feel worthless. Relationships are currency, and I was about to cash in. I started meeting with clients individually. Coffee shops, living rooms. One memorable meeting happened in a hospital waiting room because Patty Morrison's sister was having surgery that day, and she refused to miss our conversation. I did not badmouth Bradley. I did not have to. I am starting my own firm, I told each of them. It is just me, working out of my apartment. I cannot offer you fancy offices or big teams. What I can offer is this. I will answer your calls. I will remember your daughter's name. And I will fight for your business like it is my own. Because right now, it kind of is. 7 clients. Out of 12 I had managed. 7 agreed to follow me. 7 was not a lot. 7 was barely enough to survive. But 7 was a start. Dawson Communications was born on a Tuesday in March. I filed for an LLC using a template I found online. I maxed out a credit card to buy a laptop and basic design software. I converted my kitchen table into a desk and my closet into a filing system. Marcus quit Hartwell Communications the same week. He showed up at my apartment with his own laptop and a bottle of cheap champagne. I cannot work for that idiot, he announced, and someone needs to keep you from working yourself to death. I will take minimum wage until we can afford actual salaries. I do not have minimum wage, I admitted. Then I will take coffee and good conversation. He sat down at my kitchen table and opened his laptop. Now, let us figure out how to make this work. That first year was the hardest of my life, harder than the divorce, harder than the job rejections, because this time I was not just responsible for myself. I had Marcus depending on me. I had clients who had taken a chance on me. I had something to lose. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. I learned skills I had never needed before. Website design, accounting, contract negotiation. I made cold calls until my voice gave out and sent cold emails until my fingers cramped. Some weeks I was not sure I could make rent. Some nights I lay awake calculating how many months I had left before bankruptcy. Some mornings I wanted to stay in bed and never get up. But I got up anyway. Because nobody was coming to save me. Because this time I was saving myself. And slowly, impossibly, it started to work. Our first new client was a regional restaurant chain looking for a fresh perspective. Then a local nonprofit that had heard about us through Patty Morrison. Then a tech startup whose founder had been ignored by every big agency in Boston. We are small, I told each potential client, but small means you will never be just a number to us. Small means I will personally answer the phone when you call. Small means we will care about your success as much as you do. It turned out a lot of people were tired of being treated like numbers. By the end of the first year, Dawson Communications had crossed $200,000 in annual revenue. We moved out of my apartment and into a real office. One room, barely bigger than a closet, but it had a door with our name on it. Marcus cried when he saw the sign. I pretended not to notice. The local paper did a small story on us. Woman-owned PR firm. Thrives. The Elena Dawson story, the headline read. It was buried in the business section, and probably only 12 people saw it. But one of those words, thrives. That single word meant everything. I cut out the article and pinned it above my desk. I was 44 years old. I owned a business. I had employees. I had clients who trusted me. For the first time since signing those divorce papers, I felt like I might actually be okay. Then the phone rang. Is this Elena Dawson? Formerly Elena Hayes? My blood ran cold. I had not heard that name in 2 years. Who is this? My name is Simon Crawford. I am the managing editor of Boston Metropolitan Magazine. I am working on a story about Margaret Hayes and the Hayes Family Foundation. Your name came up in my research. I have nothing to say about the Hayes family. What if I told you the Hayes Family Foundation has not actually donated to charity in 6 years? What if I told you the scholarship fund Margaret runs has given exactly 0 scholarships? What if I told you I think you were set up? I gripped the phone tighter. I am listening. Simon Crawford was a veteran journalist with tired eyes and nicotine-stained fingers. We met in a coffee shop in Cambridge, far from anywhere Margaret Hayes's social circle might venture. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were financial documents, corporate filings, bank statements, the kind of paperwork that would put most people to sleep but made my heart race. The Hayes Family Foundation is a tax shelter, Simon explained. That is not news. Most of these family foundations are just ways for rich people to avoid giving money to the government. But Margaret Hayes took it further. She has been funneling money to shell companies owned by some very interesting people. I flipped through the documents. Political donors, foreign investors, names I did not recognize. And then one I did. Hayes Thornton Enterprises. I read slowly. Thornton. As in Jessica Thornton? As in Jessica Thornton's father. William Thornton. Real estate developer. He was facing bankruptcy 6 months before your divorce. He received a $4 million investment from the Hayes Family Foundation 3 months before your divorce. And 1 month after your divorce, his daughter was living in your house. The coffee shop seemed to spin around me. They bought her, I whispered. They literally bought her for Richard. It gets worse. Simon pulled out another document. This is a copy of your prenuptial agreement, not the one you signed when you got married, the one filed with the court during your divorce. I looked at it. The terms were exactly as I remembered. $50,000, no property, no claims. This is what I signed, I said, confused. Look at page 15. I turned to page 15. My signature was there, dated 6 years into my marriage. I had no memory of signing anything on that date. This was the modification, Simon said quietly. Your original prenup was actually quite fair. You would have received $2 million in the beach house. But this version, signed 6 years ago, changed everything. I did not sign this. I looked up at him. I mean, that is my signature, but I did not know what I was signing. Richard brought me documents all the time. Taxes, property refinancing. I trusted him. I signed whatever he asked. The modification happened the same month as your third IVF failure, Simon said. The same month, Richard started traveling for business more frequently. He was already planning to leave you, Elena. He had been planning for 6 years. The room tilted. I excused myself and barely made it to the bathroom before I was sick. 6 years. For 6 years, I had been living with people who were actively engineering my destruction. Every kind word from Richard was manipulation. Every criticism from Margaret was intentional erosion. Every failure I blamed myself for was sabotage. I had thought my marriage fell apart. The truth was my marriage had been dismantled, piece by people who were supposed to love me. When I came back to the table, Simon had ordered me a glass of water. If you publish this story, I asked, my voice hoarse, what happens? The Hayes family faces a PR nightmare. Possible investigation into the foundation. Margaret might actually face consequences for once in her life. And what do you need from me? Your story. On the record, with documentation. I thought about it. Going public meant re-entering the world I had escaped. It meant facing Margaret's wrath. It meant becoming a target all over again. But it also meant something else. It meant every woman who had ever been manipulated by a rich family might see her own story in mine. It meant maybe, just maybe, I could stop them from doing this to someone else. I learned a long time ago that there is a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is about making them hurt. Justice is about making sure they can't hurt anyone else. I had to decide which one I wanted, because the path forward looked the same, but the destination was very different. I want to be more than a victim in your story, I said finally. I want to show how I survived. Simon nodded. Then let us get to work. The next 3 months were consumed with investigation. I dug through boxes of financial records I had saved without knowing why. I found emails I had forwarded to my personal account years ago, just in case. I reached out to former household staff who had witnessed things they were too afraid to report. Ruth Baker, the housekeeper who had saved my grandmother's locket, agreed to speak on record. She had worked for the Hayes family for 20 years. She had seen everything, Miss. Hayes knew about the affairs, Ruth told me over the phone, her voice shaking, all of them. She helped cover them up. She told me once that a good wife learns to look the other way. She said that women who complain about their husbands deserve what they get. Richard's lawyers sent a cease and desist letter. Margaret began a whisper campaign, telling everyone in her social circle that I was unstable, vindictive, mentally unwell. Some of my clients got nervous. 2 dropped my firm, unwilling to be associated with controversy. "We are losing accounts," Marcus said one evening, spreadsheets open on his laptop. "Maybe we should wait until we are more established. Fight this battle when we have more resources. If I wait until it is safe," I told him, "it will never be safe. Some things matter more than money." The article published on a Thursday in October. The Hayes Deception, Inside a Society Family's Web of Fraud, Manipulation, and the Woman Who Escaped. It was devastating. It documented everything: the foundation fraud, the prenup manipulation, the coordinated campaign to destroy my reputation, and alongside all of it, my story of rebuilding. The response was immediate. The article went viral. National outlets picked it up. Hayes Deception started trending on social media. Women across America shared their own stories of financial abuse in marriage, using my experience as a starting point for their own confessions. I went on a podcast to discuss the article. I was terrified, my hands shaking the entire time, but I made myself speak clearly. "I am not special," I said. "What happened to me happens to thousands of women every year. The only difference is I got lucky. I found people who helped me, and I found the courage to start over. That courage is inside every single one of us." At a women's business conference the following month, I received a standing ovation. 3 years ago, I told the audience I walked out of a mansion with a garbage bag of clothes and $47. Today, I run a company. I employ 12 people. I bought my friend Carol's bookshop so she could never be evicted. And next week, I am closing on a little house with a garden where I can grow roses again. The applause went on so long, I did not know what to do with my hands. I had won. Against all odds, against all expectations, I had actually won. Then my phone buzzed. Richard Hayes III announces Senate campaign, a new generation of leadership. And right below it, Margaret Hayes, named campaign chair, vows to restore the Hayes name. I watched the press conference on my phone, standing in the parking lot of the conference center, where moments ago I had felt invincible. Margaret stood at the podium, dabbing at eyes that showed no trace of actual tears. "Our family has been the victim of a vicious smear campaign by my son's troubled ex-wife," she said. "But we believe in forgiveness, we believe in the American spirit of redemption, and we believe Richard will make Connecticut proud." Just like that, the narrative was flipping. I was not the survivor anymore. I was the crazy ex-wife, the vindictive woman, the one who could not let go. And I had no idea how to fight back. The counterattack was swift and devastating. Within 72 hours of Richard's campaign announcement, I lost 3 of my biggest clients. They all gave the same excuse: "We need to avoid controversy right now." Nothing personal, but I knew better. These were companies with connections to Hayes family donors. Someone had made phone calls. Then my bank froze my business line of credit. "Routine review," they claimed. could take weeks to resolve. In the meantime, I had payroll to meet and no way to cover it. Then my landlord showed up at our office with a notice. He had received complaints about noise levels, possible lease termination. When I pointed out that we had exactly 5 employees and none of us ever played music above a whisper, he shrugged. Rules are rules, Mrs. Dawson. They are trying to bankrupt us, Marcus said that evening, staring at the spreadsheets. They have more money than God, Elena. We cannot fight this. Then we do not fight their way, I said. We find another way. But what way? What could I possibly do against a family with $400 million, political connections, and an entire PR machine dedicated to destroying me? The answer came from an unexpected source. I was working late, trying to figure out how to make next month's rent when my phone rang. Unknown number. Miss Dawson? My name is Charles Pemberton. I believe we have a mutual enemy. Charles Pemberton was 78 years old and worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 million. Old Connecticut money, older even than the Hayes family. He had served on the Hayes Family Foundation board for 20 years, and he was furious. I joined that foundation believing we were doing good. Charles told me over coffee at his country club. Scholarships, community programs, arts education. I wrote personal checks for millions. He set down his cup with a sharp clink. Last month, I discovered where that money actually went. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents that made Simon Crawford's research look incomplete. Margaret Hayes has been defrauding her own board members for 15 years, Charles said. Not just the public, not just the IRS, her own friends, her own community. He shook his head. I introduced her to my daughter. I invited her to my grandchildren's baptisms, and the whole time she was stealing from me. Why are you telling me this? Because I am one of 7 donors who want to file a lawsuit, a class action against Margaret Hayes personally. But we need a face. He looked at me steadily. Someone the public already knows and trusts. Someone who has survived her before. You want me to be the face of a lawsuit against my ex-mother-in-law. I want you to help us stop her from doing this to anyone else. I thought about it. The risk, the exposure, the endless attacks I would face. Then I thought about Ruth Baker, deported because she dared to tell the truth. I thought about every woman who had messaged me after the article, sharing her own story of manipulation and abuse. I thought about the $47 balance in my checking account when I walked out of that mansion. What do you need me to do? I asked. The coalition formed quickly. Charles Pemberton and 6 other defrauded donors. Simon Crawford and his investigative team. A class action attorney named Catherine Reynolds, who had a reputation for never losing and a wardrobe of power suits that probably cost more than my car. Ruth Baker agreed to provide a witness statement, even though testifying meant reliving the worst years of her life. Patty Morrison let us use her bakery's back room for meetings that needed to stay private. And then, unexpectedly, came Jessica Thornton. She showed up at my apartment one evening, mascara running down her face, clutching a manila folder like it was a life raft. He is doing the same thing to me, she said, before I could even speak. Richard, he is setting me up. I found prenup modifications I never signed. I found money missing from accounts I did not even know existed. And Margaret told me yesterday that after the election, Richard will need a more appropriate wife. She laughed bitterly. I am the next you. I stared at the woman who had worn my robe, who had called me the wife, who had helped destroy my marriage. Why should I help you? You should not. Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I was horrible to you. I was 28 and stupid, and I believed them when they said you were crazy, but I have documents you do not have. I have recordings. Margaret says things around me because she thinks I am too dumb to understand. I can give you everything. What do you want in return? Out. I want out. Before I end up with a garbage bag and $47 like you did. Sometimes the person who hurt you becomes the key to stopping them from hurting anyone else. Forgiveness is not about them. It is about whether you want to carry that weight forever. I stepped aside and let her in. Sit down, Jessica, I said. Start from the beginning. Over the next 3 weeks, I learned more about the Hayes family than I had in 12 years of marriage. I learned that Margaret had been running the same scam for decades. Target a young woman from a modest background, make her feel special, chosen, slowly isolate her from friends and family. Modify the prenup without her knowledge, then discard her when she was no longer useful. I was the third wife Richard had divorced this way. The first one had been paid off to keep quiet. The second had a breakdown and spent 2 years in a psychiatric facility. I was supposed to be the third casualty. The difference was, I refused to disappear. Jessica's recordings were damning. Margaret discussing how to handle Ruth's deportation, Richard laughing about the prenup modifications, financial records showing where the foundation money had actually gone, and the kill shot. Margaret on tape threatening a federal judge who had ruled against the family in a previous case. Judge Patterson has a daughter at Yale, does he not? Margaret's voice was calm, casual. It would be a shame if her scholarship situation became complicated. When I played that recording for Catherine Reynolds, she actually smiled. We have them, she said. Then the disasters began. Vivian Hartwell died in her sleep, peacefully, they said. But there was nothing peaceful about losing the woman who had given me a second chance. I spoke at her funeral, barely holding myself together. Vivian once told me that your past does not define you, I said to the small gathering of people who had loved her. What defines you is what you do next. I spent 2 years trying to prove her right. I will spend the rest of my life honoring her memory. 3 days later, Ruth Baker was deported. Someone had reported her immigration status to the authorities. Someone who knew exactly how to hurt us. She has grandchildren here, I told Marcus, numb with shock. She has lived in this country for 30 years. They took her to hurt me. This is what we are fighting, Marcus said. This is why we cannot stop, but stopping seemed increasingly inevitable. Because a week after Ruth's deportation, our lawsuit documents were leaked. Not to the public, but to Richard's campaign team. Every piece of our strategy, every witness statement, every piece of evidence, someone on our team was a traitor. The coalition began to fracture immediately. Charles Pemberton called to say he needed to reconsider his involvement. His daughter had received a threatening letter. Nothing overt, just a reminder of how many business connections the Hayes family controlled. 2 other donors dropped out within 48 hours. They had families to protect, they said. They could not risk the exposure. Catherine Reynolds sat across from me in her office. The leaked documents spread between us like evidence of a crime scene. They know everything, she said. Our strategy, our witnesses, our timeline. We need to figure out who talked. But even as we investigated, more cracks appeared. Simon Crawford's editor received pressure from advertisers connected to the Hayes family. The magazine was suddenly less enthusiastic about follow-up coverage. My remaining clients started getting nervous again. One more dropped us, apologizing profusely. I just cannot afford the controversy, she explained. I understood. I hated it, but I understood. That night, I sat alone in my office. Marcus had gone home. Everyone had gone home. The lawsuit was dead. The campaign was working. Richard Hayes was going to become a senator, and Margaret Hayes was going to win. I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. To Margaret Hayes. Subject, you win, you took my husband. You took my money. You took my reputation. You took Ruth. You are going to take everything else. I give up. What do you want from me to make this stop? I stared at the words. My finger moved toward the send button, And then my phone rang. Elena! Carol's voice was sharp with urgency. Turn on CNN. Right now. I grabbed the remote and fumbled with the television. The screen flickered to life, showing a press conference I did not recognize. But I recognized the woman at the podium. Jessica Thornton stood surrounded by lawyers, her blonde hair pulled back severely. Her designer suit exchanged for something simpler, more serious. She looked terrified, but she was speaking anyway. For 3 years, I have lived a lie, Jessica said, her voice shaking, but clear. I was told Elena Dawson was a mentally unstable woman who had to be removed from the Hayes family for her own good. I was shown documents. I was told stories. I believed them because I wanted to believe them, because the alternative was that I was a home wrecker who destroyed an innocent woman's life. She paused, took a breath. The alternative is true, and today I am releasing every recording, every document, every piece of evidence I have gathered over the past 18 months. The Hayes family did not just defraud their foundation. They systematically destroyed lives. They used the legal system as a weapon, and they are about to do it again, unless we stop them. I watched as Jessica played the recordings. Margaret's voice filled the screen, cold and calculating. Richard's laughter at my expense. The judge's threat. The financial fraud. The leaked documents were Jessica's. She had been the traitor all along, but she had been a double agent. She had fed false information to Richard's team while keeping the real evidence secret. She had let them think they had won, and then she had blown up everything they thought they knew. Within 24 hours, Richard Hayes withdrew from the Senate race to focus on family matters. Within 48 hours, the Hayes Family Foundation was placed under federal investigation. Within 72 hours, 3 board members turned state's evidence in exchange for reduced charges. And within 1 week, Margaret Hayes was indicted on 14 counts, including wire fraud, witness tampering, and conspiracy. The traitor in our coalition was finally revealed too. Bradley Hartwell, Vivian's nephew, had been feeding information to the Hayes family in hopes of gaining their business connections. Margaret, I can give you Elena's entire strategy, he said on a recording Jessica had obtained. I just need your help expanding into New York. Bradley was arrested for conspiracy. Vivian's company, finally free of his influence, asked me to take over as CEO. I declined. Dawson Communications was my company now. I had built it with my own hands, and I was not going to abandon it. But I did accept a seat on Hartwell Communications' board of directors. It felt like what Vivian would have wanted. I thought I was fighting alone, I told Marcus that night. I thought the powerful were invincible, but powerful people make powerful enemies. They just do not realize it until those enemies find each other. Marcus raised his glass. To found enemies. To found enemies, I agreed. Margaret Hayes's trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 3 days. I told the jury about signing papers I did not understand, about IVF failures blamed on my stress, about a garden that took 12 years to build and was destroyed to make room for a tennis court. I did not cry. I did not shake. I told my story clearly, completely, devastatingly. The verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon. Margaret Hayes. Guilty on 14 counts. Sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Richard Hayes. Guilty on 8 counts. Sentenced to 7 years. I was standing outside the courthouse when the verdict was announced. Reporters swarmed me immediately. Ms. Dawson, how does it feel to see them convicted? I thought about the question carefully. It feels like the beginning of healing, I said. Not just for me. For every person they hurt, every woman who was told she was crazy, every employee who was silenced. This is what accountability looks like. That night I visited Vivian's grave. I brought roses from my new garden, the ones by the south wall that had finally started blooming. I did it, I told her. Not because of you, but because you taught me I could. Thank you for seeing something in me when I could not see it myself. The wind rustled through the leaves. I liked to think it was her way of saying she was proud. 5 years passed. 5 years of building, growing, becoming. Dawson and Associates, as we were now called, employed 85 people. We had offices in Boston, New York, and Washington, D.C. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies, nonprofit organizations, and political campaigns that actually believed in something. I published a book. Second chapter. Rebuilding After Betrayal became a bestseller, not because I was a great writer, but because millions of women saw their own stories in mine. I started a foundation, a real one, with transparent finances and actual scholarships. We helped women escaping financial abuse, providing legal assistance, job training, and emergency housing. Ruth Baker came back. After 2 years of legal battles, her deportation was reversed. She walked through the doors of the Foundation's Hartford office on a Wednesday morning, looking older but unbroken. "I was not sure you would want to see me," she said. I hugged her until we both cried. Ruth became our community liaison, connecting with families in situations similar to what she had endured. She was perfect for the role because she understood, in her bones, what it meant to have everything taken away. Carol Sullivan retired from the bookshop and moved to a cottage by the sea. I visited her every month, bringing wine and stories about the Foundation's latest success. "You know what I remember most about when you first arrived?" Carol asked one evening, as we watched the sunset. "My terrible mascara?" "No," she smiled, "the way you held your head up. Even when you were sitting in my spare room with nothing, you held your head up. I knew then you were going to be fine." I did not know that. Of course not. That is what friends are for. To know the things you cannot see in yourself. Marcus Williams became the COO of Dawson and Associates. He still had zero filter, still made me laugh when I wanted to cry, still showed up at my house with champagne. Whenever we hit a milestone. The gala happened on a Thursday in November, not at a private airport or a fancy hotel. We held it at a community center in Hartford, accessible to everyone. I wanted the people we helped to feel welcome, not intimidated. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. Carol was there, and Marcus and Ruth, Catherine Reynolds, who had become a friend, Charles Pemberton, whose lawsuit had eventually succeeded in recovering most of the defrauded foundation money, Patty Morrison, whose bakery had expanded to 3 locations, Simon Crawford, who had won a journalism award for his Hayes investigation, and Jessica Thornton. Now Jessica Wells, having reclaimed her maiden name, she ran our support groups, helping other women escape the same trap we had both fallen into. 8 years ago, I said, I walked out of a mansion with a garbage bag. 5 years ago, I almost gave up. Today I stand here because of every person who believed in me when I could not believe in myself. I took a breath. The world will tell you it is too late. The world will tell you that you are too old, too broken, too damaged to start over. The world will tell you that 42 is past your prime, that 15 years out of the workforce makes you unemployable, that rich people always win. I paused, letting the words sink in. The world is wrong. You are exactly the right age to become the person you were meant to be. The applause lasted longer than I knew how to handle. I just stood there, tears streaming down my face, accepting a standing ovation from people who had become my family. Later that night, after the guests had gone home, I walked through my garden. My roses were in full bloom, even in November. Something about the microclimate of this particular spot, protected by the house on one side and a stone wall on the other. I was 50 years old. There were laugh lines around my eyes and gray at my temples. I had stopped coloring my hair 2 years ago, deciding I had earned every single silver strand. I had never felt more beautiful. Marcus appeared with a bottle of champagne. I assume we are celebrating? We are always celebrating something. He sat down beside me on the garden bench. The New York Times wants an interview for the anniversary edition. Vanity Fair wants a profile. And some production company wants to buy the movie rights. Tell them I will think about it. I accepted a glass of champagne. Tonight, I just want to enjoy the roses. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. So, Marcus said eventually, was it worth it? Everything you went through, I considered the question. I had been asked it before, in interviews and speeches and late-night conversations. I always gave the polished answer, the inspiring answer, the answer that fit on a motivational poster. But with Marcus, I could be honest. The pain? No. I would not wish that on anyone. The betrayal, the humiliation, the years of rebuilding, losing Vivian, losing Ruth, even temporarily. Watching my ex-husband and his mother try to destroy everything I built. None of that was worth anything. Marcus nodded. But the person I became, the people I met, the lives we have changed. I looked at my roses, blooming against all odds. I would not trade her for anything, not even the woman I was before. I was preparing for bed when my phone rang. Unknown number, late evening. I almost did not answer. But something made me pick up. Ms. Dawson, this is Detective Sarah Mitchell with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. I am calling about Margaret Hayes. I sat down on the edge of my bed. She is in prison. The case is closed. The Hayes case is closed, the detective agreed. But during our investigation, we found something else, something bigger. I waited. A network, Detective Mitchell continued. Foundations operating the same way Margaret's did. Shell companies. Modified prenups. Systematic financial abuse. All connected. All using the same methods. How many? At least 40 women that we have identified so far. Trapped. Silenced. Financially destroyed by powerful families across 6 states. Some of them have been fighting alone for years. Some of them do not even know they were victimized. The patterns are identical to what Margaret did to you. I closed my eyes. 40 women, 40 versions of me, sitting in bus stations, crying in bathrooms, wondering what they did wrong. What do you need? Your foundation has the infrastructure, Detective Mitchell said. The public trust, the expertise. You have done this before. You know how to help these women find their voices. I thought about Vivian, who had given me a chance when nobody else would. I thought about Carol, who had offered me a spare room because Margaret Hayes had told her not to. I thought about Ruth, who had risked everything to save a cheap locket because she understood that some things cannot be appraised. I thought about Jessica, who had walked into my apartment expecting hatred and found something else instead. I thought about every woman who had messaged me after reading my book, saying your story is my story, saying I thought I was the only one, saying you gave me hope. Tell me everything, I said. That night I could not sleep. I sat at my desk, the detective's information spread before me. 40 women, 6 states, patterns of abuse stretching back decades. Some of these families made the Hayes fortune look modest. This was bigger than one lawsuit, bigger than one magazine article, bigger than anything I had ever attempted. But I was bigger now, too. I opened my laptop and started a new document. Second chapter, the network. The cursor blinked at me, waiting. I started typing. For 15 years, I thought I was alone. I thought the isolation was my fault. The manipulation was my imagination. The financial control was just how marriages worked. I thought I was the only woman stupid enough to sign papers she did not read, to give up her career for love, to trust someone who was systematically destroying her. I was wrong. There are thousands of us, maybe hundreds of thousands. Women who signed prenups they did not understand. Women who closed their retirement accounts to simplify the finances. Women who gave up their careers because their husbands wanted traditional values. Women who woke up one day with garbage bags and $47 and no idea how they got there. This book is for you. You are not crazy. You are not stupid. You were targeted by people who knew exactly what they were doing. And here's what they do not want you to know. The cage door is not locked. We just forgot we have the key. I wrote until dawn. The words poured out of me like they had been waiting for years. This was going to be my next chapter. Not a victory lap, not a retirement. A new beginning. I called Marcus at 7 in the morning. I need to talk to you about something. It is 7 a.m., Elena. I know. Are you awake? I am now. He sighed. Coffee. I need coffee before whatever this is. An hour later, we were sitting in my garden with coffee and croissants from Patty Morrison's bakery. The FBI found 40 women, I explained, 40 cases that match what happened to me, scattered across 6 states. Fighting alone, some of them for years, and you want to help them. I want to do more than help them. I want to build something systematic. Legal resources, financial recovery assistance, job training, housing support. Everything I wish I had when I was starting over. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. This is going to take everything we have, he finally said. I know, it might fail. I know, we might lose clients. We might lose money. We might spend years fighting and never see results. I thought about Vivian, who had built a company from nothing and never stopped fighting for what she believed in. I thought about Carol, who had kept her bookshop open for 30 years through every economic disaster because books mattered to her. I thought about Ruth, who had endured deportation and still came back to help others. Some things matter more than money, I said. Some things matter more than safety. Some things are worth fighting for, even if you might lose. Marcus set down his coffee cup. Okay, he said. Then let us get to work. The network case became my obsession and my calling. Over the next 2 years, I worked with the FBI, with Catherine Reynolds, with journalists and advocates and survivors across 6 states. We identified patterns. We connected victims. We built cases. Some of the families fought back viciously. They had lawyers and money and connections. They threatened and intimidated and tried every trick Margaret Hayes had used. But they made the same mistake Margaret had made. They thought we were alone. We were not alone anymore. The first case went to trial in Virginia. A woman named Patricia Anderson, 62 years old, had been divorced by her husband of 30 years with nothing but the clothes on her back. Same modified prenup. Same pattern of isolation. Same financial abuse. Patricia had been fighting alone for 5 years. Now she had an army behind her. The verdict came back guilty. Her ex-husband received 8 years in federal prison. The second case settled out of court in Florida. The family paid $3.7 million in restitution rather than face public trial. The third case, in Connecticut, resulted in a class action lawsuit involving 17 women, all targeted by the same network of estate attorneys and financial advisors. With each victory, more women came forward. With each story shared, more survivors found the courage to speak. The documentary aired on a Wednesday evening. Breaking the Silence, One Woman's Fight Against Financial Abuse. 90 minutes of testimony, evidence, and truth. I was not the only person featured. Patricia Anderson told her story. Ruth Baker told hers. Jessica Wells explained how she had turned from perpetrator to ally. Catherine Reynolds detailed the legal strategies that had brought down some of the wealthiest families in America. But I was the thread that connected everything. $47? I said in the final interview. That was what I had when I walked out of my marriage. $47 and the clothes on my back and no idea who I was without his name. I paused, looking directly into the camera. Now I know. I am the woman who refused to disappear. I am the woman who built something from nothing. I am the woman who proved that the powerful are only powerful as long as we let them be. And I am just the beginning. There are thousands of women like me. Millions, maybe. Women who were told they were crazy. Women who were told they deserved what happened to them. Women who are sitting in bus stations right now, wondering if anyone will ever believe their story. I believe you. We believe you. And we are coming to help. The documentary received 3 Emmy nominations. More importantly, it received 11,000 emails from women sharing their stories. 11,000. The foundation expanded to handle the volume. We opened offices in 12 states. We trained advocates and counselors. We partnered with legal aid organizations and domestic violence shelters. Ruth Baker became our national spokesperson, traveling to conferences and community centers to share her story. Everyone said I was too old, Ruth told audiences, too poor, too foreign. They said nobody would believe an immigrant housekeeper against a family like the Hayes. She smiled. They were wrong about me, and they are wrong about you. Jessica Wells ran our support groups, helping women process the particular trauma of realizing their marriages were elaborate cons. The hardest part is accepting that none of it was real, Jessica explained in her sessions, that every I love you was calculated, that every gift was a manipulation. But here's what I have learned. The love we build now, with people who see us clearly, that love is real, and it is stronger because we had to fight for it. Carol Sullivan, now 75, volunteered at our Vermont office. She ran a book club for survivors, choosing stories of resilience and hope. Stories saved me, Carol told new members. When everything else was falling apart, books reminded me that people survive impossible things. People rebuild. People become more than they ever imagined. On the 5th anniversary of the documentary, we held a gathering at the community center in Hartford. Not a gala this time, just a dinner. Survivors and advocates and friends sharing a meal together. I stood up to say a few words, looking out at the faces that had become my family. 5 years ago, I received a phone call about 40 women who needed help. Today, our network has assisted over 12,000 survivors of financial abuse. We have won 63 legal cases. We have recovered over $150 million in stolen assets. I paused, letting the numbers sink in. But those numbers do not tell the whole story. The real victories are harder to measure. The woman who started her own business last month. The grandmother who finally told her grandchildren the truth. The young wife who recognized the warning signs and got out before it was too late. I raised my glass. To everyone in this room, you taught me that survival is not a solo sport. You taught me that the powerful are only powerful until we decide to fight back. You taught me that second chapters are possible, no matter how the first one ended. The applause was warm, but I was not finished. 10 years ago, I walked out of a mansion with a garbage bag. I thought my life was over. I thought I would never matter again. I looked around the room, at Carol, who had taken in a stranger, at Ruth, who had saved a locket and changed everything, at Marcus, who had believed in me before I believed in myself, at Jessica, who had become an unexpected ally, at Catherine, who had fought in courtrooms, at the 12,000 women whose stories had become part of mine. I was wrong, I said. My life was not over. It was just beginning, and so is yours. That night, I walked through my garden one last time before bed. The roses were blooming, as they always did, the ones by the south wall that had taken 3 years to establish, now thriving in their 12th year. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who had given up her career for love, the one who had signed papers without reading them, the one who had believed that being a good wife meant making herself small. I did not hate her. I felt compassion for her, the way I felt compassion for every woman who had come through our foundation doors. She had done the best she could with what she knew. She had loved as well as she was capable of loving, but she was gone now. In her place was someone else, someone who had built a company and a foundation and a movement, someone who had turned $47 into a revolution, someone who had learned that the most powerful thing in the world is a woman who refuses to disappear. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, new case, family in Texas, same pattern. You ready? I smiled at my roses one last time, then I went inside to answer. Always, I typed back. Send me everything. The cursor blinked, waiting for the next chapter. I started reading. Outside, the roses bloomed in the darkness. Proof that beautiful things can grow in the most unlikely places. Proof that endings are really just beginnings in disguise. Proof that a woman with nothing can become a woman with everything that matters. My name is Elena Dawson, and this is just the beginning. Now I have to ask you something. At the end of this story, someone unexpected becomes her ally. Someone who once helped destroy her life. Would you have accepted that alliance? Or is some betrayal too deep to forgive? Drop your answer in the comment. I read every single one, and I love hearing your perspectives. If this kind of story speaks to you, if you believe in justice, resilience, and women who refuse to disappear, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We release new drama stories every week, and trust me, each one hits different. Share this with a friend who needs to hear that it is never too late to start over. Now, let us begin. Closing statement. Thank you for staying until the end. If Elena's story moved you, inspired you, or made you think about your own second chapter, let me know in the comments. Your words mean more than you know. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next story. Remember, you are exactly the right age to become the person you were meant to be. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted with intention, designed not just to entertain, but to inspire reflection, resilience, and hope. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community.